So we do have time for questions. We have microphones in the audience, and so I would ask that you use the microphone, but welcome question.
How do we go about getting a copy of the slides?
We're going to put them on the MISHAR website, and this is also going to be available in videotaped, audiotaped. Okay.
I'll also correct the half a dozen typos I spotted.
Do you think a national health care plan is going to help implement some of the things that you've talked about today? I noticed a lot of the studies were Canadian and from the UK.
So I'm afraid that the US is a complete mystery to me, and probably to people in the room as well. If you actually look at the literature, I think the vast, I largely presented examples which were things I'd been involved with, and I've really not done as much collaborative work with people in the US. But if you actually look across the area, probably the majority of the research has been done in the US, and a lot of the intellectual leadership is firmly based in the US. And I think there are, one of the things you have in the US is you have a number of contained healthcare systems that are able to develop these research laboratories and have done really good work. They don't necessarily always make this stuff publicly available, but there's a lot of benefit within that. I suspect that having a national healthcare plan will make some things easier and make some things more difficult. And that's probably as much as I can say in an intelligent way.
Thanks very much for a very provocative, thoughtful talk. And so I may be one of the arsonists who's contributing to the confusion in language. So this was very helpful for me. But I'm struck by the enormous complexity of the local environments in which we are trying to then implement things, whether it's the level of organization from the grand society down to the individual practitioner or patient, and then all the different factors that can play in there. And it does strike me that perhaps instead of an approach that focuses on these things work in general and these things don't in general, that a model that tries to understand the local environment and make the improvement might be better. Now that is a testable hypothesis, I imagine. So maybe you can help me with this from the perspective of the people trying to actually change the care as they're pulling things in. How can we customize what's known so that we pull in what might work in our very customized environment?
I think it's a really good comment and question. When we present the kind of average effects seen in the EPOC reviews, I don't think they're particularly informative. And if you look at the range of effects we're seeing, we're often seeing much larger effects, which suggests that if it's not, I mean, some of it might be random, but clearly there are likely to be systematic differences in either the context or how the intervention has been delivered that are influencing that range. And I think the challenge for the science is how do we actually understand what are the kind of the modifiers of any of these interventions that will then allow us to say, for us in our setting, when we look at our context, and what we can possibly deliver given our resources, then this is either something that might be useful or less useful. One of the challenges there is actually starting to conceptualize what are the potential modifiers at these different levels. And one of the issues is whether you want a kind of comprehensive or a sort of marginal model. I had a conversation that was very influential for me about maybe 14 or 15 years with Bob Brook at RAND, where as we got into this, we said, well, the behaviors in these systems is infinitely complex, and we're never going to understand everything that's driving those. But maybe there are half a dozen factors at the broader macro healthcare system level, at the organizational level, at the clinical environment level, at the clinician level, at the patient level, that if we could get a handle on them, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more tractable to start making some of those making tailoring decisions, and also exploring empirically what the effects of those tailoring decisions are. The challenge that I think we face then is that how do we identify what are the candidates, half a dozen things in each of these sectors? Because if we could identify those and agree with them, we could routinely measure them, and we could routinely start to explore whether these things are potential effect modifiers or not. And the one example I've seen outside of health was by a methodologist with the Manpower Research Development Corporation called Howard Bloom. And there's a great book called Learning More from Social Experiments, as published by SAGE. But that's an NGO that, or not-for-profit, that does often large-scale demonstration, cluster randomized controlled trials of return-to-work policies. And MRDC had done 3 really large-scale cluster randomized controlled trials. And because it was the same group doing them, they had got common measures across all of them. And so across the 3 studies, it looked as though return-to-work policies in general seemed to be beneficial. But they were able to identify, from a very strong theoretical perspective, what they thought were potential modifiers at the level of the context, the program, and the client. And they were then able to use hierarchical modeling, within the cluster randomized trial to sort of say, the average effect is this, but do any of our perceived modifiers seem to lead to larger or smaller effects? And they had a lot of data and a lot of power, but they were able to identify things such as if you are living in a community that has a relatively low level of long-term unemployment, these programs appear to be less effective, presumably because by chance people are more likely to get into the job marketplace. At the level of the program, there are some programs that focus on basic skill provision. So if you have clients who have poor literacy or poor numeracy, you teach them to address those. There are other programs that focus on interview skills. And what they found is that the programs that focused on interview skills were more effective than those that focused on basic skill development. And my sense of that probably was if you've got someone who's been in a workforce or workplace for 20 years and has survived that and then been made redundant, even if they have some basic skill issues, they're probably they have other skills that work around those once they get back into the workplace. And the final, the client, and just another one at the program level, was if the manager and the counselor shared a shared understanding about what the program meant and what they're trying to achieve, it was more likely to be successful. And then the final thing is they had certain characteristics of individuals. And so what I thought was really valuable for that would be that if I was interested in return to work policy, I might say this looks like it's something I want to do, but I might then think about, well, what's a long-term unemployment rate like? Well, actually, yeah, we are at the high level. This might be useful. I'm not going to do the basic skill stuff. I want to focus on the interview skill stuff. So you're detecting signals as you go through. And I think we need to systematically think about what are those things and how we can measure those and how we agree the terminology of the measurement to allow us to embed them and really try and make sense of it. I think until then, we're going to do a lot of sort of hoping that we're measuring the right things or we've chosen the right things. But I think if we could get a consensus in the community, that would be really helpful.
Jeremy, I'm wondering about allocation of resources for research. You point out that the United States has produced a lot of the studies that you were citing, but you also point out that a lot of them are duplicative. They replicate other things that have done. And I'm wondering what those of us who are on grant review panels or those of us who are journal reviewers should really do about that. So on grants, we're already asked, is this something innovative? And so it's something we rank, but if something's not innovative, as opposed to giving it a somewhat lower score, just say it shouldn't be funded. And similarly, as a reviewer, when someone's doing salami slicing, which is important for academics to get the publications, to be able to get tenure, do we just say this really, as opposed to saying this isn't a JAMA or BMJ, go to a lower journal, just say, we already knew this.
It might make some of our lives easier if that was the case. I think we need to have a serious debate in the research community I think the research community has to take responsibility for this. But I think at a funding level, people should be talking about what, if in Canada, if you want to do a clinical trial, you have to say, has a systematic review been done that justifies this? And I think we should be trying to articulate the same requirement for systematic reviews, really probably irrespective of the kind of question or methodology being adopted. And that could actually help what the justification is. So I said earlier that I don't think another trial of order in feedback versus control is necessary. And the first time I said that, when Ann Sales was in the audience, she scowled at me because she just had a trial funded of order in feedback versus control in nursing homes. And across 140 trials that we've got, there are no trials in nursing homes. And you could argue that in nursing homes, the kind of the structure of the staff and the expertise and what they bring is very different to other settings. So I think, if we were asking people to be much more thoughtful about what their contribution is going to fit into the literature, I think there will be times where it will be justifiable to do things where there's already a lot of information, if it's extending in a way that's meaningful. But so I think probably the first thing is just trying to really ratchet that up. The other thing would be trying to get peer review panels to know what's out there. So you can either require the researchers to put it into their grants, or you can try and provide resources for the peer review panel. Because the assumption at the moment is somehow that you're the world expert, and this should all be in your head, or you should spend 3 years doing the systematic reviews to look at the kind of the things that are coming through the panel to see if they're innovative or new. So I think we should have a greater expectation of the research community. We could ask research funders to actually support panels better in terms of providing access to the kind of knowledge that might be valuable for them. I think for journal editors, it's a real issue. I was asked to, once we identified 35 reviews of reminders, I was asked to review a systematic review for a nameless journal of of reminders for drug and alcohol abuse. And I kind of thought, wow, we declined. I just couldn't, as a reviewer, think that I was going to do that. And I don't know what the right vehicle is. Journals like systematic review because they're highly cited. I think we could be a bit more critical. I think particularly in the systematic reviews, I think primary research should get published. I think in the systematic review field, we should be trying to think about how do we organize this better. Some replication is appropriate, but just sort of basically, I think there's been 10 more reviews published since we actually looked at it at that point in time. We don't need to do that. So I think I'm actually sort of not really answering your questions, but sort of saying there, it is a problem, but we all need to take responsibility.
Thank you very much. Thank you.